when you refrain from scheduling your week or doing things that matter to you in order to leave room in your schedule for
Yes.
plans with someone romantically, ooh, that is a recipe for resentment.
Not making any plans for my week until I knew what his plans were. And then
Yep.
oftentimes how that would bite me in the ass is then I would like not make any plans and I would just assume that we were going to get together on his night off, but then we wouldn't. And then I would feel hurt and pissed and angry.
Do not model this for your children.
Hey, Chris, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here today.
Hi, Amber. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, well, right before we hit record, I was sharing with you. I'm like, I am an anxious attachment. I have that is my attachment style, and so we are going to have so much to talk about. A lot of my questions probably are going to be like asking for a friend. Really, yeah. This has been, for me, it was something that I didn't discover about myself until I got divorced at the age of 40. And I started dating somebody who, well, actually, even before that, though, like just getting back into the dating pool. Oh my gosh, all of a sudden I was like, and I've shared this before on the show, but I was just like, I was doing these things and having these thoughts. And I was like, who the fuck are you? Like, what? Like, I've
Mm,
always been a very independent, and especially in my marriage, I was almost like, avoidant, I feel like sometimes. And so that just,
yep.
anyways, I say all that to say, like, this has been a huge, huge part of my healing journey. But I'm still working on it. I mean, like it is, yeah, it's tough. So I would really love for you just to start off by sharing, with the listeners, just a little bit about how, your healing journey of really discovering this and how you healed and doing the work that you're doing today.
Well, right out the gate here, Amber, I think it's so important that discovery that you're talking about, understanding the way that you show up in relationships. This is why attachment theory is such a gift for so many people because it is context driven, it's trauma informed, it helps you to understand the contextual factors that and the experiences that you went through that shaped how your nervous system looks at the world and relationships and safety or a lack thereof. So it's really, really powerful stuff. And I'm almost finished writing my second book, which is
Yes.
based on my coaching work over the past 3+ years and thousands of hours coaching folks on 5 continents. And the very first chapter is called The Discovery. It's all
Yeah.
about what you just named and how it can be such a watershed moment to understand the origins of your behavior.
Well, for sure. And I think what was like mind blowing to me was I didn't go through in my mind as an adult, I didn't go through some big traumatic thing as a kid. What we call big T, right? I didn't
Hmm.
I but I mean, I did. I was 7. My parents got divorced. Like, there's a whole thing about that. But just growing up as an adult, because I had a very like healthy family dynamic with my like stepdad and my dad and my mom, and that
Hmm.
was not like a contentious thing. And so I grew up feeling like actually very lucky, like, oh, they get along, like everything's fine. And like, I just had no idea that that really was a freaking trauma for me. And I look at my own kids now, and I'm actually divorced now too. And I'm like, yeah, how could it not be a trauma? So, anyways, I wanted to just share,
Yeah.
like, I just feel like, it's something, you're right. It is a watershed moment. And it's something that really, I think, just has helped me and moving forward, like getting back into the dating pool of like really standing my triggers and understanding my patterns and being able to have a little bit more self control. I know we're going to talk a lot about that, but enough about me. Like, I want to know. The listeners are like, Amber, we hear you talk all the time. We want to hear Chris's story. So please share with us how you got into doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, I coach from experience. I was an anxious attacher through and through for many, 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 many years. I mean, I felt defective. And in that first chapter, I talk about how I felt like the broken one on the assembly line, like God had made a mistake when he was making me, and that I was the only one in the world struggling with having relationships with other people romantically. But for me, my trauma started actually before I was even born. My grandmother passed away from alcoholism before I came into the world. That obviously impacted my mom. It was my mother's mom. And so my mom was also an alcoholic. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old because of her alcoholism. And while she got custody of me initially, because I was born in Texas and usually they default to custody with the mother, she ended up losing custody of me. And my father got custody around the age of maybe 4. And then from about the ages of 5 to 8 years old, I was in a period of stability. My dad had relocated us to be closer to my mom. She had remarried. Years later, I would find out that my stepdad, although I never called him that, interestingly enough, I always called him Mr. Bill. His name was Bill, uh, was a schizophrenic. So that added a little spiciness to the equation as well. But between the ages of about 5 to 8, my parents shared custody. There was a regular kind of visitation schedule. Things felt normal ish. At the age of 8, though, Mr. Bill got a new job in Florida. And my mom had to relocate from Maryland, where we were living, to Florida. So about 1,000 miles away. And I went from seeing her 2 to 3 times a month to 2 to 3 times a year. Now, my dad was my rock through all of the instability that I had experienced. I also experienced sexual abuse at the hands of my own sister when I was 5 and she was 14 at the time. And so he was just there through everything. But he also was a heterosexual white guy from a specific generation who didn't really know how to handle a young gay boy with a sensitive heart and big feelings. And so, there was a lot of emotional abandonment, a lot of emotional confusion, even though there was physical stability and he provided for me and we had what we needed to get by, although it wasn't very much. I was dealing with abandonment in so many different forms. And I spent this period between the ages of 8 and 18 going back and forth between Maryland and Florida and just feeling so torn and tortured. And every time I would leave, I would just be despondent, devastated for weeks after the fact. I would be inconsolable on the plane. Sometimes the flight attendants, seeing how emotional I was, would allow me to call my mom from the phone on the plane just to calm me down. But it would take weeks to recover, and then the countdown would begin until I would see her again. And you could see that pining, that longing that defines anxious attachment being created and sowed there through those experiences. And then, unfortunately, my mom's alcoholism consumed her. She passed away when I was 18, right at the end of my very first semester of college. I decided to go to the University of Miami. Part of that was breaking out of Maryland. I wanted more diversity. I wanted to go to a city where I could be gay and like explore what that meant. But I also wanted to be close to my mom because I just really never had that. And then that was ripped from me too by a very real physical kind of abandonment. She was no longer physically present here. And that was devastating in its own right. And it also changed everything. I mean, I was in a period of my life where I was exploring who I was. You're in college, you're drinking, if not for the first time, then like early stages, getting to know your relationship with alcohol and substances and sex and your body and all these different things, relationships of various kinds, because a lot of us are sheltered in high school or growing up. I know I was, the golden child. So I was always like getting straight A's and worried about getting trophies with my soccer team and winning championships. And so, for me, my ways of coping with my mom's death were also deeply rooted in self-exploration. And so it blurred the line. And I didn't understand that drinking so much and having sex so much was bad, because to me it felt like an exploration, but it also was me trying to numb the pain of not understanding how someone could do that to themselves. And addiction naturally creates codependency. Many people do not know the relationship between the two. I didn't either at the time. And codependency is a core component of anxious attachment. And my sister, who molested me when we were young, dealt with it differently. She engaged in criminal behavior and drug usage. And so she ended up in jail. And years later, she also ended up passing away. So, three generations of women on my mom's side, my grandmother, my mother, my sister, all dead from addiction. And about the age of 25, I woke up and saw some of the early stages of that for myself in my behavior. It wasn't just substance related. And
Yeah.
this is important for people to establish too, who have an anxious attachment style. It is love addiction. The same cycles of obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors define the experience of anxious attachment, as they do the addictive cycle. They are one in the same. And so I just realized, you know what, I cannot keep going down this path. I mean, it can literally kill me. I don't want to die. I want to live, and I don't just want to survive. I don't want to spend the rest of my life just coping with all of this trauma. I want to find ways of breaking the chains, so to speak, of healing. And so at about the age of 25, that's really when I got very serious about my healing. I had started working with a therapist first when I was 18, when my mom passed, but I got even more serious about it then. And it's been a long journey from then. But that's why I got into doing what I'm doing. I want to be the person for my clients that I did not have, a guide, someone that can direct folks, to provide structure and a path forward that is supportive and encouraging and compassionate, and so that people don't waste years of their life like I felt like I did, and don't suffer through those years like I did.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious, like at what age, though, like at 25, had you identified that you were anxious attachment at that point? Because I think obviously, yeah, like when did that show up for you? Because obviously listening to your story, people are like, okay, he's been through a lot of trauma, like, and definitely been through a lot of different things. But yeah, how did you get to know that you really are anxious attachment?
It took a few years after that. And the interesting part is, I have a degree in psychology from the University of Miami. I studied attachment styles, childhood development. I mean, you name it. I knew about this stuff logically, but I also didn't understand how it related to me personally, and how it was then impacting my life now, how it was showing up now in my life, in my 20s, and in my romantic relationships. And that's a connection that can very clearly show you where your unresolved childhood stuff is your romantic relationships. That's where we feel most vulnerable. But it was my late 20s, working with a therapist, a new therapist, who in our very first session said, look, I think you have an anxious attachment style. I think you would benefit from brushing up on attachment theory. I think you should read the book Attached.
Mm.
And I ordered it. I consumed it within about 24, 36 hours, something like that, cover to cover.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed my life. Literally. I mean, I wouldn't be here having this conversation if I didn't have that realization.
Yeah, I mean, anyone listening to this, if you do not have the book attached, the only reason why I ever knew about that book was because when I was going through my divorce, and our marital counselor, had given that book. He didn't read it, but I read it. I read it,
Hmm.
and that was like a huge eye opener for me. So what? And I really want to break down for the listeners too. If there's somebody who have really never explored this, they or maybe are somebody who identifies a little bit more with me, who was like, yeah, I look back at my life, I don't really see any like major, things that happened. How would somebody even start to know, or what are some like things, other than like, joking like text stalking or what, you know what I mean? I joke only because that's like what I did. I didn't really text stalk. It was just like waiting on like bated breath for them to like reply back. And then and like having so much anxiety and reading into their texts and like, oh, did they mean this? And like for me, that was one of the big signs for me, was like this overwhelming anxiety that like, and it was like just waiting for them to like pick me or choose me or respond to me or show me attention. And like, so that was my red flag for me. I was like, okay, something's up here. You got to look into this. So yeah, what are some things that maybe you experience or that some of the listeners could like look out for if they're experiencing it?
Quick brush up on attachment theory here. Very quick understanding of the different styles. If you look at relationships as a balance between the polarities of independence and dependence, at either extreme, you have two different attachment styles. Someone who's overly independent or hyper independent is avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is overly dependent, often to the point of codependency or loss of self-abandonment, is an anxious attacher. Secure folks know how to balance both a sense of self and being with others. They don't lose themselves in their relationships. They're not hyper independent, although they are independent people, but they're not lone wolves, so to speak, like an
Mm-hmm.
avoidant will be. The fourth style, disorganized, fearful avoidant, or anxious avoidant, goes by different names and different attachment theory models. It's all the same style. It is a combination of both the anxious and the avoidant experience. And that person does pendulum swings between the two extremes, back and forth, from hyper independent to hyper dependent or codependent. They never really find middle ground. That's where the security is. That's where secure attachers reside.
I
So,
dated somebody, by the way, I dated somebody like that on and off for a very, very long time.
mm,
It's very, very, it's a mind fuck. I'll just say that it's a mind
yes,
fuck
it is. It is
because
for
then
them too.
because then when they swing to the other end of the pendulum too, like when they're doing that avoidant thing, then that just triggers my anxious attachment all over again. And the only way I knew how to describe it is that it felt like a fucking Jekyll and Hyde. Like
Hmm.
I couldn't get my head around it. Like in the beginning, so much of the love bombing and doing all the things, and that like made me feel that like made me feel good, and that fueled
Right?
mine. And then I was like all about it too. And then they'd swing to the other side, and like over a period of a few months or whatever, and then now I'm chasing again, and now I'm being triggered at like, and it totally takes all like rationale out of your brain. Like even though you're like, I know this person is not good for me, and like even like then when they get to that other side of the pendulum and they start activating your anxious attachment, it's like all like rational thinking just goes, and you get so consumed with the pick me, with the choose me feelings. It's wild how it takes over your nervous system.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. Yes.
Yeah.
That nervous system dysregulation, the hypervigilance, the hypersensitivity, all of those are signs of experiencing anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is such an external focus on what's happening around you that you tend to lose sight of, lose track of, lose regulation of what's happening in you. It is a loss of self. Now, also, it's important to recognize that anxious attachers will engage in protest behavior. They'll withhold, they'll keep score,
Mm-hmm.
they'll try to make someone jealous, they'll stalk on social media. This is a part of the experience as well. But it oftentimes sows more discord or disconnection. It is indirect, it's unhealthy. A big sign of growing more secure, of moving to a more secure side of the attachment spectrum from insecure to secure, because no one's 100% secure or insecure. We all fall usually somewhere in between. I used to consider myself about 75% anxious, about 25% secure. Now I consider that flipped, maybe even more of a percentage of security, about 75, maybe 80, 85 depending on the day and the person. And the other percentage would be anxious still, even despite all the work that I've done on myself and all of the healing that I receive by being present with folks as they heal themselves and doing the work that I do. And so the more secure you grow, the more direct you become, the more you communicate your feelings, the more you can regulate your nervous system and your emotional experience, the more you're present for those feelings. It does not absolve you from feelings of fear or doubt or worry or anxiety, but you manage it differently. And so learning to regulate your nervous system is essential. It is the core experience of insecure and especially anxious attachment. Many of the people that reach out to me from all around the world to consider coaching have done a good amount of healing. They've worked with therapists, they've done different kind of approaches, they've read books, they've listened to podcasts, but the rubber still isn't meeting the road. And that is because they've tried cognitive approaches only. So they tried to think their way out of what is a felt experience. And you can make some progress with cognitive techniques. It's not that they are useless. They are not. They are helpful, but only to a certain extent. We know this intuitively in our bodies because when we're triggered, it's not a cognitive experience. It is felt. It will take over your body, your mind, and your life. You cannot focus. You cannot sleep. You cannot eat. Your palms are sweaty. You have stomach or gut health issues. You have the lump in your throat. You have rumination. And that's a very direct sign of nervous system dysregulation is rumination, because we go up into the mind to escape what's happening in the body. If you really want to heal, you must build tolerance for stress. You must learn to regulate your nervous system and to build a capacity there that for many of us is lacking because it was never modeled for us in healthy, stable relationships.
So and yeah, I mean, 1,000%. I love that you highlight about how, really and listen, talk therapy and all these other cognitive approaches, they have their place, right? I was just having this conversation with Steph Stefandos just on the podcast not that long ago. And we had a conversation. They have their place, but you get to a point where you kind of, and I found this in my own healing journey, you do reach a ceiling, right? There's just only so much more because just like you said, think about the listeners, like when you get really pissed off, right? Or whatever, you get completely dysregulated. You can't think your way out of that. You're seeing red. It's too late to see. And also just even having those, feelings of being ultra, like you said, hypersensitive or very, very anxious, all of that. Like when you really start to feel that in your body, and I know for me, it's like my fingers start to get a little cold. I can I can start to get a little tingling. Like I know what that feels like in my body. You can't think your way out of that. And so I'm curious, what are some of the modalities that you use with your clients to start to heal that nervous system and really start to move towards a more secure attachment style?
Nervous system regulation is foundational for the work that I do. So on day one, when someone signs up to work with me, I assign them what I colloquially refer to as the daily self-care practice, but it's really a daily nervous system regulation practice. Now, this is not stuff that reinvents the wheel or that's rocket science. It's essentially making sure that you're being present with your own body and emotional experience and that you're meeting your own basic needs. Again, anxious attachers tend to be so externally driven that we're trying to keep the peace, we're people pleasing, we're trying to meet everybody else's needs and manage their own feelings at the detriment and at the expense of being with our own feelings. So at the end of the day, this includes stuff like meditation, hydration. I know that sounds silly, but our body is mostly comprised of water. If you don't have enough water, your body's not going to function properly. You need to be hydrated. This has to do, yes, with water intake, but water in doesn't necessarily mean hydration. So you also need electrolytes and things within your nutrition and with your gut health that help you with water uptake. And gut health and brain health are directly connected. I
Mhm.
don't go there in my daily practice, but it is important. So
Mhm.
things like prebiotics and probiotics are essential for gut health. Also addressing any sort of nutritional deficiencies. 70% of Americans are deficient in vitamin D. Many people have a magnesium deficiency and do not know it, and magnesium is essential for hundreds of processes in the body. So addressing these things is really important. I make the suggestion, but given that I'm not in the nutrition space, I don't tell people what to do. I allow them to explore that on their own.
But I
Cold
will say,
exposure.
I was just going to say, I do love that you connect that holistic approach because, if the listeners, if you guys think about this logically, it's like all those things that Chris is talking about is really about, just maintaining, good hormone balance, right? And all of our
Mm,
hormones, so the gut is related to our hormones, sleep, all the things, meditation, and, cortisol obviously is one of our hormones. And when one's off, they're all off. And you think cortisol is the one that sends us just into that fight or flight mode all the
stress.
time, right?
Yes.
That stress mode. So it just makes sense that to really that it really has to be a part, like the foundational part of like ground zero for nervous system regulation is are you taking care of yourself? Like,
Yes.
forget trying to heal the trauma just yet. Like, are you
Uh-huh.
sleeping? Are you exercising? Are you getting a little sun? Like, I think sometimes we can like so overcomplicate healing, and I'm not trying to dumb it down. And healing is very complex and all of that. But I think that we sometimes just we forget the foundational things that's where we got to start. So I'm so glad that you lead with that. And you were going into cold therapy, which I'm like, yes, okay, let's talk about that too because I love it.
Yeah, and great point. Look, you got to get the basics down. That's what
Yeah.
this is all about. Sleep, nutrition, hydration, breath or breath work.
Hmm.
These are all aspects or parts of what I recommend folks explore when it comes to establishing a consistent daily practice for nervous system regulation. It is about building up tolerance, and one of the best ways that helps you to do that is cold exposure or cold therapy. And this is because when you're exposing the body to cold, whether it's finishing your shower with 30 or 45 seconds of the coldest water that you can tolerate, or whether it's dipping your hands in a bucket or a mixing bowl of ice water for as long as you can take, or if you live in Alaska or you have the chance to visit Antarctica or it's wintertime wherever you are when you're listening to this, going outside and exposing yourself to cold, it puts your body into a natural state of stress and shock. Your skin is your body's largest organ, it's its most sensitive. And when you're hitting the body with cold temperatures, you're immediately going to experience that stress that you do when you're triggered, when somebody doesn't text you back all day, right? So you're
Yep.
practicing that response and breathing through it and being present with that experience. And also, excuse me, this is what uh, cold exposure helps to do as well, is to build up a tolerance, a window of tolerance. If you can take cold and colder temperatures for long and longer periods of time, you will build up a capacity to manage triggers at a deeper level. You'll move through them more quickly. It's not that they go away, they just don't affect you in the same way.
Yeah, and I want to pause here for a second because it's really interesting. There was a podcast that I saw. I don't know if you follow Michael Chernow. He's great. He's the oh my Creatures of Habit podcast host, and he had somebody on, I think, who had a guest who did they had a cold therapy company, and they were talking about that it doing the cold therapy does create that tolerance. It does allow you to move through kind of triggers better, and he got a lot of backlash for that, basically saying like you can't compare people's trauma to like dipping in a cold bath. And but that's not really what you're saying. And I get it because I do cold therapy. Like what you're referring to, and I know this is what they were referring on Michael's podcast, was it's like getting the reps in. It's sort of like doing meditation, right? Like be
Mm-hmm.
creating that mental toughness. Like when you do meditation, and your thoughts, and you practice it, like your thoughts start to wander. The more you do it, you get better at being able to observe your thoughts without judgment and just get back to the breath. You get better at that. It takes practice. And I know for me, like the connection with the cold therapy is, number one, I do agree with like being able to manage even just the physical sensations in the body, right? So like when you do have that moment of anxious attachment and like I'm feeling in my body, like my fingers are turning cold, I'm getting tingly, because I have like doing the cold therapy and I'm shocking my system, which is exactly like you said, it's exactly what happens when all of a sudden I'm fine. And then my finger starts getting numb. I get tingly because I've been triggered. I'm able to like mentally talk myself through it and be able to observe the feeling and let it pass. And so being able to do that in cold therapy when you're freezing your ass off and you're like, and being able to observe the feeling and sit through it and not get out and not run away from it and all that, it translates into those moments of, feeling dysregulated because I didn't get a text back, and being able to observe it and being able to sit through it and not walk away from it and not numb and not go to some other like behavior that I might normally do. That's the connection. And hopefully that is what you're saying. 'Cause I think that's what you're saying,
Very
but I
well
just want,
said.
okay.
Yes.
Like, I
Very
just want
well
to
said.
highlight that because I've experienced that, and it really, really is true. There is tremendous value in the cold therapy with healing that I think a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people just think, oh, it's just a fad, whatever. And it's not true.
No, I mean, a couple of notes here. First things first, as human beings, as we evolved, we did not have hot water.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
it's important to remember that we bathed in the water temperature that was available to us for millennia. So it is a natural experience. It's in a lot of ways a return to being human. Hot water also has its benefits in other ways. But at the end of the day, it also gives you a sense of agency over the experience because you
Yes.
are controlling the variables of time and temperature this time around. And what that does that you do not get when you go through trauma is you have a choice. You get to control the experience. You did not get that choice the first time around. Many of us were robbed
Mm.
of the ability because we experienced trauma at such a young, formidable age while we were dependent on others. We did not have the opportunity to leave for it to end. And so, sure, no, it's not the same as experiencing trauma. In fact, it's even more powerful because you have the opportunity to end it. And on that note, please don't bite off more than you can chew with cold exposure.
Right.
Start small with maybe 15 seconds
Yes.
of not the coldest possible temperature, but maybe the coldest you can handle, and work your way down temperature wise and work your way up time
Hmm.
wise. You're
Yep.
not, if you're starting out on a cardio journey or going to the gym or working out, you're not going to start at the highest possible incline, the greatest speed for the longest amount of time. No, you're going to work your way up to that. So
Yep.
keep that in mind. And final note on cold exposure, it releases endorphins
Yes.
and it can help to boost your mood. It has so many benefits for the skin, for hair. I mean, again, this is a return to form, to
Hmm.
naturality as humans. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. And so one of the things too that, okay, so we're talking about some of your modalities were, so we talked about, like you said, taking foundational care, cold therapy, any other thing that you want to share with the audience? Because what I want to go back to as well is some of the signs and symptoms, that people can look out for. But so, yeah, so cold therapy, foundational, taking care of yourself, anything else that is powerful and healing with the nervous system?
Yes, there's obviously so much more. I
Sure.
have a
Yeah.
12-week program with dozens of worksheets and various sessions that you can choose from. But at the end of the day, one concept that is really important that folks can institute or at least think about instituting in their lives immediately is what I call emotional diversification. And as I mentioned earlier, as anxious attachers, we are overly dependent on others to the point where we lose ourselves and we become codependent. Now, in order to come back to center here, we have to move in a more independent direction. We have to take better care of ourselves, yes, and that's what we were just mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
Building tolerance for stress, being more present with ourselves, meeting our own basic foundational needs. Yes, of course. Additionally, we need to practice emotional diversification. Diversification is a concept I borrowed from the world of finance. It is a risk mitigation strategy. You're investing when you diversify and you have a diversified portfolio. You're investing in a variety of different sectors of the market so that if one or maybe a couple of those sectors take a hit, your portfolio overall is protected. I mean, not to use a really dark metaphor, but think of these like little horcruxes for yourself from a Harry Potter standpoint. You're not going to die. You're going to live on because you
Yeah.
have your soul buried in other objects. I'm not sure if there are Harry Potter fans listening. I'm not a Voldemort fan, I promise you. I'm a Dumbledore fan. Anyway, so point being, diversification emotionally means that you have a cornucopia of connection available to you at any given
Mm.
time. And usually we're so myopic in our focus of our time and our energy on finding a romantic partner, getting them to like us, keeping them, preventing them from abandoning us as anxious attachers, that they eat up so much time and energy. This is where
Mm-hmm.
the codependency comes in. We lose ourselves. We're not taking care of ourselves. We stop going to the gym. We stop making plans with friends. We're not seeing family or keeping in touch with loved ones. We're not pursuing hobbies and passions and goals and dreams and interests. You have to make sure that you don't sacrifice those things. You will lose yourself if you do this. Diversifying means hang out with friends a couple times a week, even if it's virtual. It means going to happy hour with colleagues or at least having lunch with them. It means, to the extent that it is safe for you, connecting with family members. I know this can be complex
Mm-hmm.
and highly nuanced and triggering for many
Mm-hmm.
people. So maybe family is a lesser part of the equation for some, and that is
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Look at it like a pie chart. Your significant other or your search for a romantic partner can take up a good chunk of your time and energy. I am not saying to grow avoidant and to just completely disregard that part of your life and to become a lone wolf and insular in your approach. What I am saying is you need to grow more independent and recognize as human beings, we are social creatures and we need connection.
Mm-hmm.
Romantic connection is one form. And yes, of course, it feels great and we share things with a romantic partner that we don't with others. But you can get a good amount of your needs met with friends, family, with yourself, with colleagues by pursuing things that matter deeply to you. And yes, you can still balance the pursuit of, or maintenance of, or growth of a romantic partnership. Emotional diversification.
That I love that, and that's a huge one. And I want to take a minute, and this is actually is a good segue into also talking about some of those other things to look at, as far as like maybe some signs or things that people can watch out for. So you've mentioned a lot about like this loss of self, right? And I want to share what's really interesting for me, how this sort of creeped up, and I can look back now, and I'm getting better at not doing this. But my loss of self wasn't as blatant as like, oh, I've just cut off all my friends and I don't do, I don't work out anymore and all of that. But these are some of the things that I noticed I were doing that were little signs of loss of self. So it started off as stupid things. Like we'd be eating lunch and I know that he liked what I had too, and I would still be hungry, but like I would give him the rest of my food as like, yeah, like a pleasing thing or like some weird thing to like, even though that I know that probably makes sense to you, but maybe some of the listeners like, I don't really understand that. But it was like, I was just like, I wanted so bad his attention and affection and that connection and all of that. It was like, so it was like something like that, or it was, it was sometimes like not making any plans for my week until I knew what his plans were. And then
Yep.
oftentimes how that would bite me in the ass is then I would like not make any plans and I would just assume that we were going to get together on his night off, but then we wouldn't. And then I would feel hurt and pissed and angry and like all the things. And or like another one is like Definitely like the exercise thing, right? Like again, like
Hmm.
I wouldn't plan my workouts for the week just in case I was going to spend the night at his house. And then I didn't want to get up early and leave his house early. So I wouldn't plan my workout. And I would just, I mean, I say all this now out loud and I'm like, fuck. I mean,
Yep.
but, I mean, does any of that resonate for you of like those kind of those
100%.
micro
Yes.
moments?
You asked for signs. Those are some of the
Yeah.
clearest indicators very early on of codependency.
Yes.
When you refrain from scheduling your week or doing things that matter to you in order to leave room in your schedule for
Yes.
plans with someone romantically, ooh, that is a recipe for resentment.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
self-abandonment. What we don't, I guess, often stop to just name is we are all adults listening to this. We are fully formed adults.
Yeah.
We can drive, we can drink, we can rent hotel rooms, we can do whatever. We can go wherever we want in the world. We can buy homes and stocks and do all the adult things. And yet, we're at the drop of a dime when we meet someone that we care about or we don't want to lose them, we end up losing ourselves, which is even worse. The worst form of abandonment that you can ever experience is self abandonment
Mm.
because it is your responsibility and you are abdicating your seat of personal power when you do this. It is your responsibility to schedule your workout, not your partner's responsibility
Yes.
to do that. You have to maintain juggling everything in your life. If you're a parent, that means with your kids. It also means not giving up reading your books or having your shows or, God forbid, even just going for a damn walk around the
Yeah.
neighborhood to move your body. This doesn't have to be rocket science. You have to keep taking care of yourself. There's that saying of in airplanes, you have to put your mask on first. And there's also the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to fill your cup up first in order for you to be able to give to others. It is not selfish to do this. And it is, unfortunately, something we have to take accountability for and practice self forgiveness around the ways in which we've abandoned ourselves or abdicated our power. And that can be one of the toughest parts of healing is confronting that and facing that and realizing that we've perpetuated our own pain, that we have played a role in this.
Absolutely. And, I know we've been talking this entire episode about really a lot about romantic relationships. But you said something a minute ago that I want my moms to really hear too, which is talking about with your kids, like their anxious attachment. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd love for you to expand on this. Like it's not, and that level of codependency, it's not just in romantic relationships. Like if you are a mom that is constantly finding yourself abandoning what, your friends, you're taking care of you because of your kids, this may be something to look at, right? Would you agree? Is this something you see in your practice where women and maybe even dads too experience this sort of attachment with their kids?
100%, yes. And
Yeah.
what's even more damaging about this is children pay attention to behavior. They don't always listen to what you tell them. They learn through what is modeled for them. And so if they see you prioritizing everybody else, they
Mm.
learn, I need to abandon myself.
Yes.
So it's actually extremely detrimental what you are doing. If you are self abandoning, you're modeling that for your children. You cannot do that. They don't need you to manage their feelings. They don't need you to take away their pain or to protect them. What they ultimately need to know and have modeled for them is that they can experience any feeling, any event, any circumstance, and that you will be there with them to experience it, that they are not alone in the pain. That is what trauma is. It is disconnection, it's misattunement, it's a lack of attunement or co regulation, somebody being there with you to say, sweetheart, what's wrong? How can I help? What do you need right now? Where is
Yeah.
it presenting in your body? Do not model this for your children.
Yeah.
I have a client just this week that I met with, who is a mom to two sweet young girls. I think they're 4 and 7. And this particular client is contemplating whether or not her husband is her forever person anymore, and whether or not divorce is actually the best course of action. And she told me that she told her daughters, if you ever have a guy say to you what daddy just said to me, don't stay, leave. And I said, well, your behavior is saying the opposite. You have stayed. You stayed. They watched you stay through the abuse, through the neglect, through his lack of presence. They are paying attention to your behavior. So yes, all the parents listening to this, please know it is your behavior that your children are paying attention to. You know this already. I'm not a
Sure.
parent. You don't need me to preach it to you. You know this. I'm just reminding you of what you already know. You need to behave in such a way that you would want your children to mimic.
Yeah, and I think, and this is, I always say it's like, if you keep saying like, oh, I just don't have time, or whatever the story you've created for yourself to do that self-abandonment, right? I talk about this all the time, is like really examining. And I think this is where getting into this inner work of understanding your attachment style and all of that is like, obviously you're getting some sort of payoff for it. There is a level of
Yes.
codependency there. And you can mask it all day long by saying you just don't have time and, but you're getting a payoff from that. You're getting some sort of benefit from
There's
it. And
always a value.
yeah,
Yes.
there's always a value.
In whatever we
Absolutely.
do. And
Yeah.
for many people, for many anxious attachers, the value is if I manage your emotions for you, if you need me there with you for whatever it is that I'm taking on for you, you won't leave me. You need
Yeah.
me. I need you to need me. That is the core component of codependency, of anxious attachment. I need you to need me so you don't leave me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, and I'll know, I know for me how I've noticed it too in romantic relationships is a lot of times I think I definitely am like the fixer. I try and therapize them. I
Yep.
try and be like the stable one for them when they're totally dysregulated and all these things.
The
But
mom.
really, yeah, the mom. And really, this is just a reflection of my own insecure attachment style. Because I know you had something, and I can't remember exactly. Something on your social media, just basically talking about how, you're like, your job is not to be the fixer, right? Like it's, and talking about how, that's really not our role. And that when you get into a relationship with someone that is who is secure and who is emotionally healthy, it's not that about not being there for each other. It's just a totally different experience.
Absolutely. Yes. You
Yeah.
want a partner. You don't need to be their parent. You don't need to be the fixer. That's going to be the difference. And this can be jarring for many anxious attachers too, when they experience someone secure who's not codependent with them,
Yeah.
who's not managing their feelings, who's not trying to take the pain away. It can feel distant or removed, but it's actually healthy because
Yeah.
they understand there's nothing I can do to relieve this experience for you, but I will be here with you through it because I know you can manage it on your own. It's just that we don't believe that we can manage it on our own.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Chris, this has been, I knew this was going to be I nerd out on all of this stuff only because it has been such a major, major game changer for me to just start to understand it. And clearly, like I still, like you said, like I don't even know yet if I'm 75 and 25 like you are. Like some days I am, some days I'm not, right?
Hmm.
But this has been really, really powerful. And I know you have a couple books. I know you shared you've got one coming out. You want to share with the listeners your books and a little bit, about what you've got coming up.
Of course, yes. So I have a book that I released in 2020 that details my own emotional healing journey and how I practiced forgiveness for my mom and my sister and how I came to terms with them not being here to talk to with all the pain. It's called It's Good to See Me Again: How to Find Your Way When You Feel Lost, and it's available on Amazon now. There's an ebook version and also paperback, depending on which you prefer. Now, if today has resonated with you, I've got a lot of free content that you can consume at Crackliffe.com, Crackliffe.com. There's blogs such as 5 Ways to Heal a Fear of Abandonment, 12 Ways to Make an Anxious Avoidant Relationship Work, 7 Ways to Heal the Anxious Attachment Style. Also on my website, I have a healing toolkit for anxious attachers. It's got almost 7 hours of audio and video in there and about 10 worksheets. It's actually really 15 that I combined and distilled down to 10 from my coaching program that you can get right away. It's self-guided, obviously, but if you're looking for structure to add to, say, your therapy journey or your self-healing journey, would be a great resource. That's at Crackliffe, Crackliffe.com/starter kit. STARTERKIT. And if you're interested in really accelerating your healing journey and making progress, making the rubber meet the road, and actually learning to regulate your nervous system and having the accountability that you might have lacked in your healing journey so far, then I would be honored to explore being your coach and helping you on your healing journey. And you can set up a free consultation with me at crackliffe.com/coaching. I'm also at Crackliffe on Instagram and TikTok. I have a TikTok community of almost 150,000 people. There's lots of videos there to consume. So have at it. There's a ton of different resources for you at your fingertips.
Thank you so much. And thank you for just being willing to, turn your pain into purpose and to be so vulnerable with, your community and with my community. This is really powerful work. And I think the more that we can normalize, these behaviors and our experiences, I just think, it's definitely my mission of this show. So thank you for being a part of it. And I appreciate you so much.
Oh, I'm receiving that gratitude and sending it right back, Amber. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Words of affirmation are my love language. Thank you
Yes,
for
me
that.
too. Thank you so much, Chris.